Joining me tonight to discuss is the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, Elizabeth Wydra. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the Supreme Court heard arguments in one of the most significant abortion cases in decades. First, your initial thoughts on this incredibly consequential moment.
So I think what you just said about the shift in the court and the fact that we now have 6 very conservative justices, including 3 put there by Donald Trump, expressly with the purpose, as his words own said, as he said in his own words, to automatically overturn Roe versus Wade once they got on the bench. You know, that's where we are today. Obviously, Roe has been attacked for decades, but the court has repeatedly reaffirmed Roe, has strengthened it in the Planned Parenthood CAC decision several decades ago, and Roe has withstood the test of time, and polls show that Americans have grown to rely on it. A majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans in a Fox News poll, support Roe standing as the law. But today we had the court hear these arguments, with Mississippi expressly asking the court to overturn Roe versus Wade, and several justices, likely a majority of conservative justices, seemed inclined to do just that.
Well, during today's arguments, Mississippi's Solicitor General said Roe versus Wade has no basis in the Constitution. Take a listen to that.
Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey haunt our country. They have no basis in the Constitution. They have no home in our history or traditions. They've damaged the democratic process. They've poisoned the law. They've choked off compromise. Nowhere else does this court recognize a right to end a human life.
Elizabeth, you said it. I mean, a woman's right to an abortion has been on the books for nearly 50 years and had been repeatedly reaffirmed. Justice Sonia Sotomayor rightly pointed out that 15 justices, to be exact, over 50 years have reaffirmed the decision. So what could overturning 50 years of precedent suggest about our highest court in the land?
So it's not even just about 50 years of precedent. If we get back to really first principles, and that's the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which is what protects the right to abortion. The 14th Amendment protects equality. It protects liberty. It protects the privileges or immunities of citizenship. And when the drafters of the 14th Amendment were putting that language into the Constitution, they were concerned with the pressing question then, it was right after the Civil War, right after the ending of chattel slavery, of what does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be an equal person in society? And they knew, and the drafting history of the 14th Amendment, they talk about this at length, they knew that making decisions about one's own body, being able to enjoy reproductive liberty, something that had been brutally denied during slavery, that those things were essential to being free. And you could not be an equal participant in society if you could not chart your own destiny in those key ways about making decisions for yourself, about whether and when and with whom to have a family. And so these first principles come from the 14th Amendment, and they include the right to choose an abortion. It's essential to freedom and to being able to show up as an equal participant in society. And Roe affirmed that. Casey affirmed that. The decades of precedent since affirmed that. And so if the court were to strike down Roe, it would be engaging in, as Ronald Reagan's own Solicitor General just said, it would be engaging in an act of constitutional vandalism. And it would really be adopting a vision of the Constitution and of fundamental liberty that is so cramped and is so dystopian as to give the right to make those fundamental decisions about your own destiny, your own body, to the state and not to the individual person themselves. I think it would also erode even further the public's confidence. The Supreme Court's approval ratings, which, you know, it's a low bar, but generally they're higher than the other branches of government. They're at an all-time low right now. And people, I think, are just losing trust. And many people have lost trust long before that this court can be an equal and neutral arbiter of the law, and instead is following a political agenda.
Well, Elizabeth, those who support the right to choose and those who are against abortions both agree that no matter how the Supreme Court rules, communities of color will be affected, that if Roe versus Wade is upheld, Black and brown babies will continue to be aborted at disproportionate rates. If the Supreme Court scales back court precedent, if not reversing it outright, then Black and brown women will suffer the greatest. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the intersectional nature of this fight and the intersectional nature of the consequences of overturning Roe were on display in the court's argument a little bit this morning. You know, certainly there were conversations in the courtroom about the ways in which Black maternal health would be harmed if Roe were overturned. You know, the maternal death rate is multiple times higher in Mississippi for having a baby versus having an abortion in an approved clinic. And so, you know, the nature of this fight and the way that the right to abortion is bound up in the fight for liberation and the ability to make decisions for one's own self is bound up in the struggle for equality. I think that's an intrinsic part of the fight. And it goes back to the very nature of the right being protected, the 14th Amendment. Again, the idea of what it means to be free included the right to make these decisions for oneself. And when that's denied to people, and it is disproportionately, as you mentioned, denied to Black and brown women in this country, and if we see Roe versus Wade overturned, we know that the burden will fall more heavily on Black women. And so that's something that I don't think the justices appreciated sufficiently, although the advocates did try to raise it with the court today. But, you know, I think any concern that the justices put out, you know, they tried to say that overturning Roe would be like overturning Plessy versus Ferguson. You know, that really rings hollow when you see a conservative majority that has, in other contexts, continued to strike down voting rights protections, other civil rights protections, protections against discrimination, protections against bias in the criminal justice system, and disallowing accountability for egregious racist police abuses. You know, it rings really hollow when they try to cloak any decision to strike down Roe in the guise of working in the legacy of great decisions like the ones that struck down racial segregation.
So, okay, so oral arguments were heard today. So for people asking, what happens now? What happens next?
Yeah, so it'll probably be months, probably not until June, until we get a decision. And if there is a decision that either completely overturns Roe or just guts it in every practical way, then we'll see a patchwork of liberty really across the country, with some states not allowing access to abortion and other states providing abortion access. And those with the resources and the ability to do so will be able to exercise their rights, and those who are more vulnerable or don't have those resources will not be able to. And that's not the way that liberty should work, but that could be where the Supreme Court is taking us.
Well, there are currently 22 states right now with some law on the books that either outright, outlaws abortions in some capacity or completely. So I know that they're going to be anxiously waiting, as we all are. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, again for your time. Thank you.